A very warm welcome to you from Equa Marketing. This presentation is brought to you by Equa.com, a leader in digital marketing.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to one more episode of Growing Dentist, the amazing podcast series that helps doctors who are interested in creating a bigger future. Today, I'm very excited to have Andre from The Crew Process. The name of the website is thecrewprocess.com. Andre is known for the way he thinks about teams, and that's why his business is called, The Crew Process. And of course, we're going to talk more about that. So, Andre, welcome, and I'm so glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's good to get a chance to talk to you.
Thank you, Andre. Why don't you start by telling in a few minutes a little bit about yourself, your story, if I may, just to kind of get to know you a little bit.
Well, I started in dentistry. It's going to be almost 30 years now. I started working with my brother-in-law, who was a general dentist, and he asked me to come in and use some of the skills that I learned in customer service, in high-end retail, into his dental practice. And I just brought in some of the things that I learned from Disney, from Ritz-Carlton, from high-end designers. I took some of those things I learned outside of the dental field and brought them into dentistry. And from that point on, started a consulting business and a coaching business. And, it's been a whirlwind of different creations of businesses and processes and things like that since 1989. It's been a long time. 1989.
That's amazing. I was doing a bit of research, just to prepare for this, and the name, The Crew, struck me, and like when I think of a crew, I think of a movie crew, right? In the sense, here are people who are very specialized. I'm the best in the world at animation. I'm the best in the world at, finding the right set. And all these crazy specialized people who a lot of times don't even know each other come together, and they work together for 3 months, 6 months, and then they put together this mega blockbuster, and they all go home, and then they do it again. But the thing that fascinates me about a crew, at least in the case of a movie, is that the fact that they didn't know each other for 10 years before that point didn't really make a difference. And B, they can create this amazing blockbuster even though they all have such a different skill set and specialization. I mean, some movies, as you know, can gross like hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's not bad for 6 months of work.
Yeah, that's not bad. I think it'd be great if we could do that in the dental field. A lot of that has to do with the fact that these people stay in their lanes. They know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of these things are, a lot of these processes that you're talking about with a movie don't happen in the chronology that we see them happening on the screen. So you have to have this sort of foresight in order to put together these pieces, know your skill, but also understand and have the confidence in what the other people are doing so that they all mesh together. And that's that collaborative approach to any process that we talk about. That's where that's the reason I came up with this idea of crew, is because, for years I'd been going to these team building classes, and these, everybody was understanding that, that the sort of cliched way of, I'll stand here and you fall back, and I'll catch you before you hit the ground, and that makes us a team. Well, what that does is it gives you confidence in me as a person, but not in my goals. Why am I doing this exercise? So a lot of what I was doing is kind of dispelling that myth that team was the thing to focus on, and really was the why would I catch you? Why is it that my responsibility to catch you is so important in this whole process? And when I started using that format, it took me in another direction. It took me out of the idea of saying, you know what, we have to become a better team. We have to be more like each other, or more friendly outside of work, to a point where we have to be aligned in our responsibilities and our goal attainment and the way that we perceive this outcome. And that's what, like you said, a movie crew. If you look at, a naval vessel, we talk in terms of crew. We talk about when we get on a plane, we're talking about a crew. They're very specialized responsibilities that everybody takes seriously. And, we see it when we fly Southwest Airlines, where, the flight attendants are part of that crew, but they're having fun doing it. And when the flight is over, they can go off their different directions and still be friends. But when they get back on that plane and the door closes, it clicks and they are responsible for our lives. It's a big difference.
Yeah, so you left so many nuggets there. So the one thing you said is, in a movie crew, for example, they're so specialized. They don't deviate from their lane. So I want to kind of explore that a little bit more in the context of dentistry. And second thing you said is this idea of the myths around teamwork. So I think before we can learn something new, we need to learn what the myths are, right? Because sometimes I've heard people say, to have a breakthrough, you have to tell the truth. You have to deal with the truth. If you don't deal with the truth, I mean, you're going to live in this la-la land, and you're going to be, if you do what you did yesterday and expect different results, it's not going to happen, right?
Exactly.
So do you want to start at talking about the myths first, or do you want to start by talking about, you pick?
Well, I love the idea of dispelling myths, because I agree. And like I said, in my experience, I'm 30 years in dentistry plus years and years and years in retail. We live through these myths of, if we go to these team building courses, we will become better at our craft. And that myth holds today. I go to offices and, they expect that we're going to be doing team building classes, and we're going to learn how to sing Kumbaya and hug each other and be better people together. And that's great, but as an outcome, what happens is we become friends, but we don't move the ball forward. We can't get better at what we do by just becoming better friends. What we have to do is we have to better clarify our goals and then move forward. We have to get past the idea that we need to be friends. We have to get past the ideas that uniforms make us all work collaboratively. The most, like the Chicago Bulls basketball team, who won 3 championships, publicly address each other and say, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman, the 3 top guys, said that they never, ever had a relationship off of the court. When they got on the court, they were phenomenal together, but they didn't even talk to each other when they were not on the court. And, we think, boy, that is the dream team, but really they're the dream crew. They're the people who, I get the ball, I put the ball in the basket, we make a point. They're the guys who should be the role model for most dental offices. When we're on the court, when the gloves go on, we have to work in such a way that I trust the doctor to be doing his responsibilities, I trust the hygienist to do her responsibilities, and I trust the administrative team to do their responsibilities. And guess what? That will all click if we start with a goal in mind, we start with a philosophy of treatment, et cetera, et cetera. Those things have to be established first before the friendship. And that's the myth that I wind up finding that every time I go to an office is, we have to be better at loving each other before we can do better. No, we have to be better at understanding what our outcomes are before we can do better. The other things happen, as a social function.
One second.
Sure.
Let me just slow down, because you're giving me so much information. So the first point you made there is, the myth is, loving each other and singing Kumbaya and I fall and you pick up. That is actually standing in the way, as opposed to, if you're really focused on growth and performance, as opposed to really, really understanding what is my scope. Like, I'm a hygienist, or I'm a person answering the phone, right? Or I'm the person, working on patients and their teeth. So the step one you're saying is, each person has to be very, very clear what my job is. Like Michael Jordan. Actually, I used to live in Chicago when Michael won the last 3 championships. I was going to school, and we were riveted. This guy comes back, and it's just magic.
Yeah.
You're right. Now that I think about it, Dennis Rodman didn't get along with. I think they didn't even say hi to each other. They hated him, and and at least Scotty and Michael were kind of friendly, but they didn't hang out and go to the bars together. They said hi, and that's it. But it was magic. Of course, Phil Jackson was the man behind the curtain, so to speak. Kind of making these guys do amazing teamwork or crew work, if I were to use your terminology. So what you're telling me is, key point is every person has to have a clear-cut definition of what they need to do, and then other people have to be able to count on them, right? So in the case of Dennis Rodman and Michael Jordan, you knew Dennis is going to, defend, and rebound. So you could trust him. He was the best in the world at it. And you knew if you give Michael the ball in the last second, he's going to score. Doesn't matter how he's going to do it, right?
Exactly.
And Cody was an awesome support for Michael, right? So, yeah, that's interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that. I want to understand, your definition of.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is when I find that, offices rely solely on that, and we'll use the word friendship. If, that friendship teamwork idea, I go into offices and they'll say, well, we can't let go Sally because she's, we love her and she always, provides the best cakes when we have events. But she's not really good with scaling and route planning. Just use that as an example. And I go, my thought is they're holding on to the friendship at the detriment of the clinical outcomes of their patients. They'll say, well, we keep so-and-so because she's the sister of somebody else and we don't want to mess up that relationship, but she tends to drop instruments, or, and so we lose focus on our goal when the primary focus of the practice is this kinship. And not to say that I don't look forward to having fun with people, but I also, when I'm running a business, I expect that everybody is on the same page.
So you're saying purpose, right? So you're saying people miss having clarity around what the important purpose is. In that example of a dental office, the purpose is this crew working amazingly well together where everybody does their piece. Like, Dennis, rebounds and, using that analogy, and, Jordan scores and so forth. So is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it will trickle down. I mean, if your administrative staff is not on the same page with philosophy of the doctor, they're going to hem and haw when it comes to treatment presentation. So, if the doctor is saying we need to do an implant and we need to do an implant crown on this tooth and we need to do this, and the front desk is questioning that philosophy of care, as they present it, they're going to say, well, he's going to do an implant, but sometimes he might have done a bridge. And that pause in conversation to the patient will break down financial arrangements. It'll break down their acceptance of care. It may even cause a cancellation. So all of these things, unless you have this alignment, this calibration, the right side of the boat is pushing the oars in one direction, and the left side of the boat is pushing them in another direction. And you're never going to have an outcome that is expected.
So how do you, so you're talking about a second point here. You're saying, yes, everybody does their role, but there needs to be alignment where everybody's on the same page, right? So how do you get that alignment?
You really have to ask the hard questions. And that is, one of the first things, when I started doing this, people were going through the process of, saying, do we do amalgams in the practice as opposed to composites in the practice? And, that was, there was a big insurance war, and there was a big, sort of back and forth, us versus them, composites versus amalgams. And one of the things that when I had offices who were asking about making that transition, I said, a show of hands in the office, who thinks that amalgams are a legitimate restoration in the practice? And you would see this hemming and hawing, people afraid to raise their hands, whatever. And I said, this is a good starting point where we could open this conversation up to other things, like who in here agrees that everybody should pay at the time of service? Who agrees that we should be open on Saturdays, or whatever the question is? And really just asking those hard questions and expecting an outcome, expecting them to answer and show hands, those are the kind of things that get you to the point where you can go to the next step. Well, I believe that we should put all of our patients into perfect occlusion, or whatever you want to, whatever the next step is going to be, and finding out where everybody stands on that idea. I see daily where offices aren't in alignment. One hygienist does things one way, another does another thing, and then the doctor walks in the room and won't agree with either of their diagnosis. So everybody's going to be on the same page before you can even move forward. So you've got to ask the hard questions, and you have to find out where people stand. And they may not be the right person for the job. They might be successful in another practice, and that's okay with me. You've got to find people on your crew who row at the same pace you do, or they're going to mess up your stroke.
Right. So you're telling me it's like you walk into these practices, one person has a map of New York from 1970, the other one has a map of New York from 1980, the other one has a map of New York from 1990.
Mm-hmm.
And they all say different things because these are not the same map. So they're always getting lost and confusing the patient in the process.
I agree. And the idea of team would tell you that it doesn't matter which map you use as long as we end up at the same place. We all use different maps and we all meet in Times Square. Okay, but if our methodology says we need to take 42nd Street to 7th Avenue, 7th Avenue down, that is a very clear direction, and that is, we share a philosophy. We find the quickest route. We find a way to get there. And yes, everybody can have their own way to get to Times Square, but as a leader, as a philosophy of treatment, as everything else, we all need to be on the same page and not question it. If we decide we're going to try a different route and we go, hey, the way we did this in the 70s on that 1970s map, actually we got to walk by some really interesting places and we got to see some interesting people. So let's take that 1970s route. As an organization, as a company, as a business, we can make that choice. It doesn't have to be the most efficient way, but it has to be the way that we all decide to do it.
Right. So when you, I'm sure, walk into a practice, these people are all doing it different ways, and like you said, they don't have alignment. How do you actually physically, do you tell people, no, this is my way or the highway, or how do you actually get them from that, disarray and not in alignment to a place? I'm just curious. I'm just thinking I'm a fly in the wall and trying to listen to this conversation.
Yeah, and honestly, what I try to do is I try to find out where they want to go, because I've been in more than 5,000 practices, and I've seen lots and lots of successful ways of doing things. Not the way I would necessarily do it, but it's the same as, I carry a Windows phone. I may be one of the few people in the world that carries a Windows phone. Most people have a Samsung phone, an Android phone or an iOS phone. And here's the deal. I love the way my phone works. For me to convince you, if you carry an iPhone, to get a Windows phone would be ridiculous.
Right.
But guess what? I am unbelievably efficient with the way that I use my phone. And you may be with your iPhone or an Android phone. But here's the deal. I don't need you to change as long as we get to the same outcome efficiently. So usually when I go into a practice, it's an observation. I look at the way they do things, and here's the way I kind of look at it. Every practice is made up of bricks, and everybody has these bricks that they stack on, and they're different philosophies of care, different ways of processing different information. And those bricks are great, and they're very solid. But what happens typically is the mortar that holds those bricks together is not sound. So my job is to come in and say, you've got these processes and these bricks, but let me shore up your mortar. Let me come in and fill in those gaps to figure out how we can stick these bricks together so that they become this solid item, this wall of information. So my job is to come in and actually fill those gaps in and say, what, let's tweak this, let's do this. Let's come up with that 1970s map and say, this is how we're going to get to Times Square. That's my job, is to make those to make up that direct route, not to say, what, we need to take Manhattan and move it into the Bronx. That's crazy.
Right.
The solid objects are there. I just need to make sure that it's very clear how we get there.
So what I'm hearing is so they have 80-90% of what they need. It's just that because of those little tiny tweaks that they don't realize they need to make, they don't perform at 100%. They're performing at 50%.
Sure. Well, that's the typical. Most of us, we go to these conferences, and we hear a phenomenal speaker. A couple of years ago, I got to hear Tony Robbins speak. One of my heroes. And it was amazing. I got to see the guy speak, and I was charged up, and I was ready to do the things that he talked about. And then the next day, I went back to my old routine. Now, those are the same things that happen in dentistry. Well, what has to happen in that process is somebody needs to be there, like a Phil Jackson, who takes this talent and is able to come in and say, "Hey guys, you're off of your game. You're not passing the ball to Michael when you need to. You're not letting Dennis get the ball. You're in the way of Dennis doing his job. So let me show you that you need to step back and let Michael get the ball. You need to let Scotty run the ball down the court. You need to let Dennis get the ball as a rebound. You need to let people do their job and do it well, or we need to go back to the draft and get another center, get another defensive man. We need to get a big man on the court." And that should be something where everybody recognizes that, hey, we don't have a good person answering our phone, and we need to seek somebody in the draft. We need to replace that player, and then we can get better at what we do. And the problem
Actually, thinking about Dennis was not part of the team. They brought him in because they realized that piece was missing.
Exactly. And we don't do that in dentistry. We tend to deal with our damaged players. We'll let them sit the bench, and we're going off on left field in this sports analogy, but we tend to let a damaged player sit on the bench and take up our salary cap instead of going to the draft and pulling in a new player who could replace that player and replace the player well. We tend to hold on to damaged players. And, I almost every case that I've ever seen of embezzlement was typically a damaged player who continued to be on the team and draw money from the practice. And typically, what I hear from the owners of the practice is, "Oh my God, that person was the person that took my child to daycare when I needed somebody that picked, to drop him off," or and it's that damaged player who's been pulling down the practice for years, and it never fails. It's almost like a cookie cutter. I can find that in almost every practice I go in. There's one weak player who's been pulling down the salary of the entire practice.
Right. It makes a ton of sense. This goes back to what you told me in the very beginning. You said, I'm sorry, I lost my about you're talking about crew, right? And the myths. And you said people think being friendly and singing Kumbaya is the secret to success, and that's actually the exact same thing that's stopping you from success.
Yeah, and we don't want to get to a level of where we're robots doing a job. Right. We're all people, but sometimes we overlook the best player on the court because they have tattoos and blue hair. That's not what makes us better. We need to be better at because we have a particular goal in mind in order to get to that end result. And that's why I love my job because I'm kind of the unconsultant. I don't purport myself as being a consultant. What I am is I'm a coach, and I enjoy the idea of coming in and tweaking some processes and then stepping back and watching how the game plays out. These are the kind of things that we put into place that we can find better results from small changes.
Now, let me ask you a tough question. I mean, like when Phil Jackson left, Bulls died, and he went to, LA, and LA started doing better, right? I mean, Lakers. So, two questions. One is, what happens when you leave? And again, what's the role of the dentist in all of this? Like, what happens with the dentist?
Well, I subscribe to the theory of, it's called a skein. And what a skein is that formation that geese make when they fly.
Right.
The idea behind that is the goose who's at the front of the pack takes a lot of the wind resistance and is the leader at that moment. But at some point, that goose has to break off and somebody else has to take leadership. So I subscribe to this idea that the doctor needs to be the leader until they put their gloves on. The minute the gloves are on, then guess what? Somebody else needs to be the leader, and that could be the office manager, it could be somebody on the administrative staff, it could be the dental assistant who has those leadership skills. That person takes over, and that person directs the processes, and that each person in kind takes responsibility for leadership. The front desk does it when the phone rings. They take leadership. The hygienist takes it when she's with the patient. So each person has a chance to lead, and I'm putting that in quotes, at the time they need to lead. So when I work with a practice, what I do is I build that leadership so that everybody has the ability to stand at the front of that skyne, at the front of those geese flying. And at each point, they should be able to take a day off, but the pack doesn't fall apart. All the geese don't just take a break because one of them got tired. They're able to start taking over new responsibilities and move forward. So my job is to build that leadership so that when I step away, there's somebody else who can step forward. And at some point, you need to bring somebody back in, and that's okay. But my job is never to be, that consultant who's always always there. My job is to be that consultant who can step back, let you lead, and then as you need tweaks, I can come back and help.
Right. So I think I'm starting to understand. So you're saying your job is to make sure that they are building the muscle. So the person who's answering the phone really has built the muscle. Obviously, if it's the right person, they've built the muscle to be the leader for that. How do we wow customers so they love us and, book those appointments, right? So everybody has a purpose and a focus, and your job is to, get them on the right page, so they're all, looking at it the same way and thinking, cohesively, and then realizing what they need to do to succeed in that role, and then give them the muscle so they can lead their area. Plus, from time to time, there are people, and again, the titles, it looks like, doesn't make a difference. So you didn't say, oh, it must be the office manager or it must be this person. But from time to time, when the doctor is wearing the gloves, somebody else is doing what you are doing, coaching. And hey, you know what, maybe we should, remember what we talked about, and maybe we shouldn't do this, and so forth, right?
Exactly. Because
Right.
leadership is tiring. Leadership is tiring. And one of the great things about having this idea, this Skyne idea, is that, if we all work together, we won't all get burned out at the same time, and somebody should lead a meeting differently every time. We come from different backgrounds. And those make, each experience a little bit better because it's not going to be the same thing every time. The doctor talking about what's going on in the practice or the office manager talking about what's going on in the practice. And each of us leads at a different pace in a different way. A hygienist is going to lead from a perio-focused standpoint. A doctor is going to lead from, a restorative standpoint. The owner doctor is going to lead from the, business standpoint. So everybody has a different view of it. And we all have different relationship with the patients, so that patient contact relationship. So we all get a different story from a different point. So everybody should take a chance to lead.
Right. You have come in, you've done your tweaking, and you have this amazing practice. And I walk into that practice. How will it function compared to before you walked in? I'm just wondering, are there any critical pieces like meetings or any critical components that kind of make it click?
Well, each one's different, and that's the one thing that has always confused me about when I see people who work with consultants. Usually I'm never the first person into a practice. Usually I'm the second, third, fifth, 10th person that's worked with a practice. And there's typically a binder on the wall from each of those consultants they've worked with. And those binders contain these protocols that they expect the office to follow. I never found that that a binder is going to be binding for, any development that the practice has. What I find is that routines change what people do. So typically when I leave, the practice has evolved into a new dynamic of business. And I'll give you an example. When I work with a practice, one of the first things I try to change is how they present treatment, meaning they are now focused on outcomes. And when they treatment plan, they focus on that outcome. They have a new language that they use about treatment. And that, that's not, that's nothing new in dentistry. What it is The doctor can clearly state, and hygiene and everybody else can clearly state in very concise terms how they do dentistry, what they expect as outcomes, and what they expect their patients to see as treatment evolves. And it's just like anytime you go to if you go to Nordstrom's, if you go to Disney, if you work with somebody on the phone with Zappos, you understand what that person expects from their customer and what they expect, as a outcome for the services you receive. That's what has to happen in dentistry. We have to get that same idea so that just like when you're going to Disney, you have an expectation of enjoying yourself. You have an expectation that everything's going to be clean. You have an expectation that the cost will be a return on your investment. If we can get the same thing in dentistry, we can get that same kind of outcome from our patients. Patient compliance goes up, patient acceptance of care goes up, all that goes up. So I expect when I leave a practice that those things will have changed. Treatment presentation is clear and concise. Financials are clear and concise. The way we answer the phone, clear and concise. And that is what I expect when I leave. If it doesn't happen, it's typically because people didn't buy into the process. And that's a hard thing because we're all people. But if they don't buy into the process, nothing will change. And that happens. I mean, I accept that I have failures in what I do. But a lot of it is because they don't get it and they're not ready to change, but they want to get better, but they just are in a place now where they want to change. So that's what typically happens.
Right. So you're saying the way you know if something is working is they unlearn all these myths. They realize they are a crew that can depend on each other, and they really are super focused on what they contribute. And they also have to, be on the same page, like you said, right? I mean, doctor and the hygienist and so forth. If you are not on the same page, it's a mess, and the customers see it. I mean, the patients see it.
Oh,
then,
yeah, I agree.
And then
I agree.
You help them, be a strong crew member, plus, team member or crew member, whatever the word is, plus you help them get on the same page, and plus the last piece is where I'm struggling a little bit, plus you teach them, give them clarity or give them, so in other words, yes, you love answering the phone and you're such a delightful person, but make it, help them realize the most important things they do so they're not wasting their time or effort or energy on the other stuff, and they're just zoomed into that important stuff. And I use the word clarity if I'm not mistaken. Am I?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it is clarifying. That's like I said, a lot of what I'm doing is just helping them to clarify where they're going with treatment, what their outcomes are going to be. How many days a year are you going to be working will determine how many patients we need in order to fill those chairs for those days. So now we know how many new patients we need. We know how many, what our percentage of loss is calculated at. We have to have clarity before we go forward. A lot of times I go in an office and I say, how much do you want to make next year? And there's this, well, I don't know. I read an article about this and that. And I say, let's back up. How much do you want to make? How much are you making now? And the gap between the two things is what we have to work on.
Right.
We have to be real clear on those things. Otherwise, what are we shooting at? Where's the target that we go towards?
Right. If you're not clear on your goals, of course you're not going to get there because you yourself are not clear on your goals, right? So I think that's step number one, being very clear
Sure.
on what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah, this is very insightful and very interesting. Let me just jump into something different. I know. I do digital marketing, and that's what my business does. And I know you love, you're into, how do we help patients who come through digital marketing, including social media? Like, tell me your perspective. I mean, times have changed. So tell me how it used to be and how are things today, and how you can, and how you help practices, in today's digital world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm big into social media. I love the idea of social media, and I love what it's doing for dentistry. But I think one of the things that has changed is that what I started off in dentistry with 30 years ago was this idea that I went to the dentist because my dad went to that dentist, and then my kids go because I go, and that idea of patient loyalty is gone. And what has evolved is this new dynamic of patient loyalty that is tenuous. What we're able to do now is we can attract patients to our practice through social media, through marketing that way. But how do we keep patients in the practice? So, well, social media is one of those things that we have. I don't think we've been able to figure out how do we keep patients in our practice. We can attract them. So what I like doing is when I have an office that works with a great group like yours, you know, we're attracting patients at a level of X. How do we keep those patients in the practice? I have an office that they lose about 80% of the patients that they get in, and a lot of it has to do with their fee structure and the way that they handle insurance, and they lose, 80 out of 100 patients that they get in. But those 20 that stay, we have to figure out how we can keep those people happy. We have to figure out how we can keep them in the loop, and we can figure out now, what drives them forward. So a lot of what I do is working with our social media experts to capture patients, find out what they like about the practice, and then take that to the next level. A lot of it is how we answer the phone. How do we deal with our billing structures? How do we deal with, how our patient contact? And we can use social media to reach out to those patients who are our longtime patients, and just to have this social touch after they've become new patients.
So let me understand. How do you keep them happy? Once they're in, I'm curious. You said the loyalty is gone, right? Which is, I also noticed the same thing. Like, I'm going there because my mom went there or my dad went there. That doesn't work anymore. So how do you keep them happy, and how do you keep them engaged?
A lot of it is, honestly, that's where the social interaction inside the practice happens. And one of the things I was talking to a colleague about recently is, the idea of word of mouth is no longer the same. With Facebook, I don't need to ask you which restaurants you would tell me to go to in Chicago. Now what I can do is I can look at your Facebook page and say, oh, I know that you're very much into food and wine, and I see that you went to X restaurant in Chicago. So it is word of mouth, but now it's digital word of mouth. I don't need to ask you one-on-one about it. I can see what you're doing and get that same referral. So it's switched in the way that we see word of mouth referrals, and we can take advantage of that. We can figure out ways to take advantage of that. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how this new era of technology affects what we do on a daily basis. And a lot of that is just about, understanding that things have changed. We no longer carry a little black book. We carry an iPhone or some other form of communication. So we just have to figure out how to best, utilize those technologies in order to do the things that we did in dentistry 10, 15 years ago. We have to understand that Instagram is a new way to get to our patients. We have to understand that Snapchat may be a new way of getting to our patients, and not be afraid to move forward with those kinds of technologies. Using those things to get to our patients, using those things to deliver the message that we do X procedures, but also, it needs to be lifestyle marketing. We need to show patients why patients come to our practice, and not because of services, but because of the way we treat patients. Not the treatment, but how we treat patients.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So one of the things that we do with our clients in social media is we call it referral marketing on steroids, right? In the old days, I liked you. I tell my friends about you, and I tell one friend. And the trust that I had in you as my dentist transfers to my friend, and the friend now trusts you and therefore comes and sees you. The problem is that's not happening anymore. A lot of people are not going out of their way to tell their friends. So one simple technique, we use a lot of techniques in social media that we use is we have these signs. So the sign might be, Um, I love my smile, right? Somebody hosts that sign, we snap a picture, we post that sign, we tag the patient. Now what happens, it shows up, that picture of the patient, with that sign on the Facebook news feeds of 300 friends of that patient. It's as if this patient picked up the phone and called 300 friends. I mean, imagine the power of that,
Sure.
right? And it's like, I mean, how much would you pay for somebody to make 300 referral phone calls, right? It's the same thing. Now what happens, out of the 300, five of them really like this friend and they like that picture. Now it's as if they picked up the phone and called 300 of each one of their friends. So it goes from 300 friends of the patients to 1,500 friends of those five people. So it's amazing. So I think one of the things I notice, and I'm sure, I don't know what you're saying, is that doctors don't realize, the power of this. I mean, they look at it as, oh, I need to do Facebook. But it's really, Facebook is a way to engage people exponentially with very little effort, especially when it comes to transferring trust, right? The trust of one person to the other. That's what it does.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and that's why I was thinking, it's very important that we get this, this billboard of information out there. The social media becomes the billboard on the road, but once the phone rings, what are we doing? If the phone rings and we get a busy signal, what's the use of the social media? If 10 friends are saying you should come to this practice, but when I call, I get this gruff voice on the other line that doesn't let me come on the days that I want to come in. What's the use of social media? So, it's kind of the yin and yang. While when one side of that circle is very, very important, the other side is critical to make that whole process happen.
Absolutely. I think it's about connecting dots, right? I mean, yeah, if social media or my reputation says it's an amazing practice, but I call and nobody answers the phone, immediately my expectation, this expectation of, it's an awesome practice, they're so customer friendly, goes out the window.
Exactly.
And I have even seen reviews where people get so mad that they had a certain expectation and then the phone is not answered or whatever, and somebody called them back a week later. They write a nasty review even before they walk into the practice. So they haven't even seen the doctor, but they're so mad because their expectation was violated, so to speak.
Yeah. And dentistry has become a commodity, and it's we have to get it to the point where it is more of a service than it is a commodity. And once we get it back to the point where it is a commodity, a service that patients understand, appreciate, and value, that's when we're going to be able to get our patients to lock back into that referral for the same reasons we did back when we went because of our fathers, mothers, etc. We have to get dentistry back to that instead of a commodity. And the medical world has kind of hindered us in that, but we can get it there. And I think a lot of it has to do with just creating these ideas that our practice is different and driven by this particular philosophy. I think that's where a company like ours comes into play.
That's awesome. I think we have been talking for more than 45 minutes. I just wanted to ask you, if I want to learn more about your practice and how you can help a dentist, do you have any kind of consultation or a call where they can get to know you? Just tell me a little bit about how people can find out and what the next step might be.
Sure. Two options. Well, more than that, but here's a couple good fast options. Give me a call. Anybody who's interested in talking, just like we're doing now, 45 minutes goes by very quickly. I'd be open to conversations with any doctor who's interested in talking, and they can reach me directly on my cell phone. That's 484-437-5562. That's the easiest way to get me. You can go to our website, which is www.thecrewprocess.com. There's information there and contact information there for the rest of my crew. But call me directly. Typically I've got OCD, so if my phone rings, I'm going to answer it. And I'll be glad to talk through any things that doctors are going through, see how I can help. And I'm one of the few people out there in the business who, if I'm not the right person for you, I've got friends all over the industry who I will be happy to refer you to because we're very specific about what we do. And we have great friends who do other types of consulting, and I'm happy to refer to people who can help you.
So you believe in your own philosophy of, being the crew, right? You're really good at your piece.
Oh, I live it every day.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Andre. I really, really enjoyed our chat today, and I look forward to working with you more over the years, and I'm sure people will get a lot of value from today's conversation.
I appreciate it. It's a great talk.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone listening to one more episode of Growing Dentist. Have a wonderful day.